Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John O'Sullivan. I'm the president of the Danube Institute, and on behalf of the Danube Institute, the Foundation for Civic Hungary, and the Christian Democratic Institute, who are our joint sponsors on this occasion, I'm delighted to welcome you to this important discussion, and to our two speakers. Now, Zsolt Németh really needs no introduction to a Hungarian audience, as he's the chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs. He's also one of the most distinguished voices on foreign policy in Hungary, and is as well known in Brussels, London, and Berlin as he is in Budapest. Among his other responsibilities, he is the head of the political committee of the Council of Europe, and his presence here today is a tribute both to Mr. Peña and to the importance of the issue which we are going to be discussing today. I would also just welcome also Sophia van der Wacht, who is the president of the Christian Democratic Institute. Sophia, thank you very much for helping with this, and secondly, for being here. And I'd like to welcome to former Hungarian ambassador to Italy and to Rome, yes, Italy and Spain, Anniko Duri, who is also present. I'm sure that, by the way, there are other distinguished people in the audience, and I offer right away my apologies for not being able to introduce everybody. Now, I mentioned Mr. Peña already, but he is a distinguished Venezuelan political exile. He now lives in Italy, having left Venezuela following his false imprisonment for defending Venezuelan democracy against the Bolivarian dictatorship of Chavez and Maduro. In exile, he has greatly contributed to the world's understanding of how democracy is under attack in Latin America in particular, but not only in Venezuela, but in other countries there too, and he will be speaking about that too today. But in particular, Mr. Peña has studied how Latin American democracies have been corrupted by fraud at the hands of the progressive left through institutions like the São Paulo Forum. And I think you have 3 of your books available here today at the back, and I encourage you all to not to leave without them, not to leave at all for the next 2 hours. It's always difficult to get people around the world to take fraud and anti-democratic actions of other kinds by the progressive left seriously. Some years ago, a historian friend to me said, John, he said, the world it has got a left-wing bias. And I think that is generally true. Actions that would be condemned by the right are instead celebrated or ignored by the international community when they come from the progressive left. But that became impossible in the case of Venezuela last year, when brave Venezuelan Democrats organized to collect election results that clearly showed the government had lost, unmistakably showed. There could be no doubt about this. Yet the official electoral body fraudulently claimed a government victory. The world saw that Venezuela had committed electoral fraud against its own people. But after a period of worldwide indignation, we all tend to move on onto other issues as they occur and forget the outrages we have witnessed, almost with our own eyes. It's very important, it seems to us here on the panel, but in our other organizations represented, to say we can't allow this kind of victory for fraud, particularly since now this kind of fraud is beginning to appear not only in what used to be called the third world or developing countries, but also in Western democracies. And I would have to say that includes the United States. We couldn't have 2 better people to discuss that issue, that important issue here today. And I'm going to ask Alejandro first if you would just outline your discoveries and your analysis of organizations like the São Paulo Forum. And then I will ask, first of all, I will ask Zsolt to respond, but then also I think we're going to want to have a fairly active discussion from the floor as well afterwards. Alejandro.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, thank you for
John, for these words, and the organizers, the Danube Institute, the Center, the Democratic, Christian Democratic Institute, Sofia here, is also the ambassador of Argentina present today. Thank you very much, Zsolt. To explain or to answer your question, I propose to show you some slides, which I hope they can be put. They gave me this, maybe you can use my chair.
I'll sit in the front for a while.
Okay. They gave me this magic apparatus where I can use this and show you some things. Latin America is very easy to understand. It's probably the simplest continent in the world to understand. Why is that? Well, I will tell you first how Latin America must not be analyzed. When you see a map of Latin America, this is what you see. 20 countries, if you include Puerto Rico, of course, which belongs to the United States. But you see these colors and you say, wow, this is crazy. This is very difficult to understand. You have to study 20 countries. I'm including Brazil, and I'm excluding the Guyanas, the island of the Caribbeans that are related to France, to the Netherlands, and to the British, and also Trinidad and Tobago. But the rest, that's Latin America. You would say, well, it's 20 countries. How can you understand that? Well, this is the real way to understand Latin America. There are only two countries, or two regions. Brazil, they speak Portuguese, and the Spanish-speaking countries that used to be provinces of the same country, of Spain. So imagine this territory of 20 million square kilometers, this from Mexico to Argentina, including Brazil, with 650 million people, with one important characteristic. I was telling Zsolt this. You take a plane in the north of Mexico, let's say in Sonora, a direct flight to Santa Cruz, Argentina. You're from the south, right? But you're from Mendoza. No, I wasn't yet. Mendoza, but Santa Cruz is south. It's 9,500 miles. You travel that long, and when you land, you speak the same language, you have the same identity, you have the same culture. Any Latin American will tell you that. The only difference is the accent. The rest is the same. To give you an example of what that means, if you take a plane from here, Budapest, direct flight to Washington, D.C., it's only 7,200 miles. So this is larger than from here to Washington. Same language. That is the potential of our continent. But then you can say, well, but of course, it's the same region, same languages, but each country has a different history, a different political situation. Yes and no. Why? Because the communication between our countries is so fluid because of the language and culture that things do not develop country by country wise. It doesn't happen like that. It develops in waves, One wave affects almost the whole continent, then comes another wave and another wave. For example, let me give you three. When the Cold War, in this country, there were 12 right-wing military dictatorships affecting 12 countries at the same time. Why? Well, because there was this fight against the leftist guerrilla groups supported by Cuba and Russia. So the reaction to that was military right-wing governments. And it was happening at the same time in our continent. Then, after the Cold War was over, then at the same time, we have in the continent democracies all over, like a second wave, composed of probably Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, but all Democrats. Then, a few years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were 14 countries related to the São Paulo Forum. 14 at the same time. That's a third wave. And this is the situation now. That's how we must see our continent. Blue represents right-wing or center-right governments, and red, the governments belonging to the São Paulo Forum. This is what is happening now. I was telling the ambassador that there's a struggle between these two sectors. And you could say, well, the communists are winning. The red is larger than the blue. Not exactly, because this guy is in trouble, Gustavo Petro. Nicolás Maduro, as I will explain later, is in trouble as well. And most probably Chile will change in the next election, and other countries as well, because Latin American people are fed up with socialism. And with the arrival of Donald Trump to the White House, that'll give impulse to a change in the whole continent. So Zsolt, Németh asked me to give a first presentation on how we should analyze our continent. And I would say that this is pretty much what it is. This is a situation now. It is a fight, an important fight. And later I will explain why it's not a political fight. It is. But it is more a fight between democracy and organized crime, because the São Paulo Forum has become a criminal organization. How about if I leave it at there and then I continue?
Perhaps then, Zsolt, I can ask you to make the first response.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I would stay sitting. And I should speak English, I guess. It's better, yeah, okay. Is there any translation? No, no translation, okay. Then it is decided. Thank you very much, John and Melissa, for organizing this book show. The Danube Institute is an extremely important asset to us, Hungarian conservatives, because you are opening us up to the world. And your work in the past decade has been extremely important from this aspect, John, and we are extremely grateful to you for doing this important job. And now we can see that it is not without some effect, because Viktor Orbán is getting to be quite well known in the world, not just in the neighborhood, but beyond. And also the policy that we are representing is getting an echo in wider and wider circles. I believe now what we can say about this Trump tornado, as we tend to say, is that the maneuvering potential of Hungary, of the Hungarian foreign policy, has become fundamentally broader. And the big question is to all of us that how we can exploit this opportunity that we are given, and hopefully we will be able to exploit this huge opportunity in front of Hungary in the international fora, and not just for ourselves, but beyond. And I think it is a crucial question how we relate to different regions of the globe. And Latin America is certainly one of the very important regions we need to relate ourselves. Alejandro Peña has a very rich biography, but probably one thing I would like to boast about, that he is the leading expert of the Christian Democratic Institute, which is reflected on that roll-up. And I would like to greet Sofia van der Wecht, who is doing the hard job to establish and to popularize the Christian Democratic Institute. But with such aides like Alejandro Peña, it's not difficult at all. And we are very proud to say that we have got now 3 books translated into Hungarian, and probably it would be useful to us, Alejandro, if you told us that what these books are about. And now we have got today the book show of the last one, the 3rd one. The first 2 books have been published in the last years, and this year now we are able to show to the Hungarian public the 3rd one. And this is one of the very few events we are able to introduce the book to the Hungarian audience. Probably we had once an opportunity. I would like to welcome also Lorena Capra, the ambassador of Argentina. Argentina is an important hope, and that's now, I think, the substance of our discussion, which I would like to come back. But we are very honored, Lorena, that you are here and that you have started to build up the new dimensions of the Hungarian-Argentinian relations. I hope your wine and your beef is also going to arrive soon to Hungary. I don't need to explain it to this Hungarian audience why your beef and wine is so important to us in our relations. If I mentioned Argentina and the books of Alejandro Peña, I would like to greet Varga Korytar Pál, our former ambassador to Argentina, among others, who has translated these books into Hungarian. Thank you very much for your work, and we are very honored that you are with us. And anyone who would like to translate important Latin American and Spanish literature into Hungarian, I can suggest Varga Korytar Pál, because he is very efficient and very quick in his work. And if we have recognized so many ambassadors, I would like to recognize Csudai Balázs, also our ambassador to the United Nations, at a point. Turning the page to the subject, in what situation Latin America is. All of us, we are in a situation when we are trying to digest the relevance and the importance of the Trump tornado. And I would like to ask Alejandro and John to reflect upon this, how you see this. I think the most important is that Trump, President Trump, is not an accommodating type. He has views, and there will be a kind of proactive American policy towards Latin America. And we need to follow what kind of steps are coming. I don't think we see the whole Latin American toolbox for the time being. Some steps have been done. And I think important to read from these steps. But probably the most important thing that something will happen as we are experiencing with the war and as we are experiencing with everything what Trump is touching. And I think it's a good news that America is becoming proactive, but at the same time, this kind of proactivity is has certain principles, which is creating, I think, a system. He is not. I don't agree with those people who say that Trump is such a personality that you cannot prejudge, you cannot see what he will do. I think you can read from these steps that there is some logic in the attitude how he steps up. Probably the first country which I would like to mention is Mexico. Let's start with that. Mexico is, you can read the policy of Trump towards Mexico. The border is long, the migration is dangerous, the influence of the migrants in the electoral process have been decisive. So we in Hungary, we understand what is to build a fence. We have built our own fence. Trump is building the fence. The money is allocated towards building the fence. And also Trump is having a very clear approach towards the broader economic relationship, again, towards Canada or towards Mexico. And he's calculating in his relationship to Mexico not just economic aspects when he talks about economics, but also, for example, the agreement on the return of the migrants, which is going to be one of the vital elements he's trying to achieve in his relationship to Mexico. But when we talk about Mexico, we talk about this map as well. And I am very glad that Alejandro has brought us this map, because this is now the actual picture of red and blue in Latin America, but there is a process going on. And Mexico is one of the key players in maintaining the red influence in the whole Latin American space. So from this aspect, it is crucial what's happening in this country, which is, all you know, is a G20 country, along with Brazil and Argentina, a very influential global player, but at the same time, player in this Latin American left movement, player in the drug production, player in narco terrorism, and player in very serious organized crime as well, which is the standard phenomenon of the Latin American political space. The next country which I would draw the attention is probably Alejandro will elaborate it, is Venezuela. Venezuela, along with Cuba and Nicaragua, are full-fledged dictatorships. And these full-fledged dictatorships bring the very strong ideological content into this red map. But as we heard, it is shaken by the victory of in the last presidential election of Edmundo González and Maria Machado. They are two extremely important players now in the Venezuelan future. And in the European Parliament, Annika and the colleagues, the Patriots, including the EPP, have accepted the resolution to recognize as the winner of the presidential elections Edmundo González. So I think this is a very important sign on behalf of Europe that we are behind the transition to democracy in Venezuela. And if that happens, because actually at the moment Venezuela is the main source of these very nasty financial backing behind all the negative things I have mentioned before, it might have an important domino effect for the whole Latin American political space. And more countries may come into the blue orbit. Then I would like to mention also the role of these countries, Venezuela, the dictatorships, and their international relations in relation to the global authoritarian regimes. They are having intensive relations. The Socialist International is having close relations. The American Democratic Party is having close relations to the drug financing, for example, and international terrorist drug financing. And in this regard, I think it is very important that the American president has decided that, okay, we don't want that so close to us. The first step was Panama. And pushing out Panama from the Belt and Road of China, it was a very quick and successful operation of Donald Trump. Panama quit the Belt and Road. And the Chinese must read from this. And obviously Iran and Hamas and all these players who are also involved in this global network will have to read from this. So I believe for Trump, it is now a crucial question how the global players will be present in his backyard, because in the end we are talking about the backyard of the West, of the United States, when we talk about Latin America. Argentina, I have just mentioned how glad we are that the ambassador is with us, and the good news that President Milei has started something which is not just turning the country from red to blue, but he's not just a shy personality. He is bringing all the anti-woke element into the picture. And Latin American wokeism is a different type of wokeism, but it is there. And if you read the book of Alejandro Peña on the São Paulo Forum and the ideological drive of the São Paulo Forum, you will understand what we talk about. So Milei standing up against this wokeism is totally in line with the intellectual, political, and ideological approach of Trumpism in the United States, and to us, the patriots in Europe. So we hope that what's happening now in Latin America with the leadership of Mr. Milei will be a strong bridge-building process among conservative, patriotic, and sovereignist political forces all over the world. So the positive message is signaled by Argentina, but obviously other countries may be also very important to pay attention to. And I would like to ask Alejandro to give us some ideas that where he sees positive developments might continue You mentioned Colombia and Chile. It would be good to know how you mean that and what you base your statement in this regard. And I think when we talk about the European and Latin American relations, you mentioned that we have got such a huge possibility in our cooperation. We do. And I think we should play an important role in turning the attention of the European Union more towards Latin America. We have this linguistic link, the Spanish link. We have the civilizational link. The Western civilization is reaching out, and it is a common denominator among us. They are the West. But at the same time, not just the West, the third book of Alejandro is about the classical culture. And this is the West, which has produced this classical culture this book is about. I warmly suggest you buying that book as well. It is a very original formulation of our political program in the field of culture. And it can be translated, I believe, into cultural policy as well, what is written in that book. But Latin America is not just the West, but it is also the South. And I think we are not just building with our relationship with Latin America a common, very well-founded, civilizational based collaboration, and obviously the economic potential is vast and huge of this 600, 700 million region we are talking about. But also, if they are part of the global south, they may be a bridge towards the global south. And probably if we talk about the global south, building close relations with Latin America may be very helpful for Europe to represent a special voice of Europeans towards building contacts towards the global south, because I think it is in the interest of the Americans that someone is able to reach out successfully towards the global south, and Latin America may be a key player in this regard, and Europe might play a leading role in this process. Sorry if I was a bit long, but probably I wanted to also ask a few questions from both of you, and I wonder, John, how you would reflect upon these, because I'm very much interested in your evaluation as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Zsolt, for, in a sense, absolving me briefly from the role of moderator and letting me say something on my own account. I'll say briefly this. If I look at our situation today, I am struck by the similar, internationally, I mean, and not simply domestically. I'm struck at how often it seems to resemble the situation of the mid-1970s in the world, where you had fairly self-confident international left convinced that it was going to continue, in a sense, to dominate world politics, both through the Soviet Union and its allies, but also, I think, through a Western progressive left that was gradually establishing institutions and working through bodies like the United Nations, which at that time, you may remember, was proposing a new international economic order and a new international information order, which plainly attempts by international bodies to change the democratic world, to weaken the democratic world, to improve the chances and the influence of the totalitarian and authoritarian world, and to do so, in a sense, gradually over time with the consent of the West. Now, the rebellion against that is very interesting, and it's very similar, and a very similar rebellion is occurring now. Obviously, I think of Mrs. Thatcher as the key figure in this. I was one of her allies. I was a journalist then, but one of her allies anyway, in a sense. And you could see that she was one of the first people to break into the international system and say, you're doing it wrong. We want to strengthen democracy and the free market. We want liberty as well as we want order and so on. She wasn't the first. The first, oddly enough, was Pinochet in Chile. He comes into power. But the left could ignore the success of the Chilean economy in the years that followed because, after all, this was a military government. It wasn't subject to democratic pressures. They could, in a sense, grudgingly acknowledge it was succeeding economically, but nonetheless, we couldn't claim it as our own because it wasn't democratic. Then Roger Douglas in New Zealand, small country, but it revolutionized things in a free market direction, which may not have been noticed in this part of the world, but was obviously noticed throughout the British Commonwealth and other English nations. And then, of course, I mentioned Mrs. Thatcher, yes, but then, of course, there was Deng Xiaoping. I mean, he embarked on his 4 freedoms at exactly the same time as Margaret Thatcher won the election. And I think we'd all be happier if Deng Xiaoping had proved to have eternal life, because he transformed China in a direction of freedom, but of course he's been succeeded by less free people. But that began the revolution of liberty, which saw, those 4 cases began the revolution of liberty, which saw the end of the Soviet Union, the changeover of so many countries to a free economy, the emergence of something like 3 billion people in Asia and Africa from grinding poverty to middle-class lifestyles. And all of this was an immense improvement. Now, we know it's gone wrong, I would say, roughly since the beginning of this century. And that's another question. But now, because it has gone wrong, since, roughly speaking, well, you could say 1989, 1991, the end of the Cold War, which caused a lot of things, including the relaxation of discipline in the West, so that all kinds of odd and foolish ideas and utopian ideas have taken over. But now the failures of those things have produced a new revolution. Now, it started in people forget this. They tend to talk about Brexit. Well, yes, I think that's important. And Trump's first election, very important. But in fact, it started in this part of the world in 2014 with the emergence of, with the 2014 European elections, which saw the rise of the populist parties, now called the Patriots. And that was a major thing. And everyone thought that this would prove to be a flash in the pan. But in the 2 European elections since then, the populist/nationalists or national conservatives have emerged in a stronger position. No, they haven't made the sweeping breakthrough in either election that some of the adherents hoped, but nonetheless, these things happen. They're becoming more influential, and now we've had the second Trump election as well. But of course, I'm not forgetting Argentina, because the amazing emergence of President Milei has been an enormous impact, has had an enormous impact in popularizing this new revolution, partly because he's an astounding character, in some ways reminiscent of Donald Trump. Namely, he was a powerful figure in the popular culture before he was a powerful politician. His culture, he transmuted he had his own television program in which he introduced his ideas, but it was a comedy program, so you couldn't really object to it. That was the cleverness of the strategy. And he then entered politics, and he'd accumulated such a powerful following that in the popular culture, that he was able to win an election as this very colorful figure. But more than that, I mean, I went to Argentina about a year ago, just over a year ago, and I spoke to the small number of people, think tanks and so on, who had worked on his plans. And I was astounded, because I went to one, and there was a big table which had a huge number of, it was the plan of the government, its ministries, its parastate organizations. And they had this wonderful trick. There was it all laid out on the table, and then they pulled a switch, and three-quarters of those bodies disappeared, and that what was left was a leaner, meaner, more efficient government. Well, he's, in my view, he has gone on to, in a sense, having conquered briefly. I mean, all democracies can reject people, that we know that. But for the moment, he's still very much in charge, and he's succeeding. And that's remarkable. Now, when I turn to your books, Alejandro, I am very depressed by the thought that these victories take place in nation states, but they don't have an answering echo in international organizations to anything like the extent that they should. Your books on the São Paulo Institute, that's a discussion of what I'd call civil society organizations internationally. How many of those are embracing conservative or classical liberal causes? Very few. And when they do, what influence do they have internationally on organizations like the UN? The UN is a huge and expensive body with enormous power, and yet it is fundamentally hostile to the ideas of the new, in a sense, national conservative revolution, which includes the classical liberalism of Milei. All of the UN bodies are either openly opposed to this or secretly opposed to it. And they have constructed institutions, which means that UN treaty monitors go into particular countries and start telling the democratic governments that they've got to change their policies because they run counter to some obscure UN rule. That has to change, because at the moment, the UN Secretariat of unelected bureaucrats is kind of developing a world political agenda, which it then, all of its bodies begin to enforce, not only on democratic governments and others, but also on private sector organizations and private businesses. And this ought to be intolerable to us. Now, such bodies never seem to complain about events like those in Venezuela, but they would be sure to complain about events like that if they happened in a conservative country of the right. So essentially, the kind of revolution which has been occurring and which the São Paulo Institute is strongly opposed to and trying to cripple, that has to develop some of the organizations. It has to take your work, for example. There has to be an organization which takes your work and develops it as a kind of private sector electoral police for anywhere in the world. We have to have those kind of things. And most of those organizations are on the left. We have to, for every one of their organizations, one on the economy, on elections, on social policy, we have to have our own. And some of them obviously will be private sector ones or civil society organizations, but we have to establish where we can some kind of international governmental organization which challenges the center left or the progressive left orthodoxy. So that's my question to you is, at the end of all that, I'm sorry I went on a bit long, my question to you at the end of all that is, what advice would you give to us and to all the organizations that, in a sense, might be represented in this room about getting a revolution of freedom in international bodies?
Thank you.
A few questions.
Yeah, few questions from both of you. But I will try to give a second overall picture that will answer your questions, all right? Let me get up again, with your kind permission. I would say that these two sectors, blue and red, are mutuamente excluyente. They mutually exclude themselves, not only because of ideological reasons, but because the red, as I show in a few minutes, has become criminal organization. That's why. It's not just politics, it's criminal organization. I'll go that in a minute. So what I would propose to recover our continent for freedom, to help other continents, Europe and the United States, to win the overall battle. There are, in my opinion, two breaking points: Argentina and Venezuela. Why Argentina? Because Javier Milei is exporting, as you were saying. He's not limited to Argentina, but he is exporting not one, two revolutions. He's not a dictatorship. He's not military. He's democracy. But he is showing to the world an economic revolution. He's in just 1 year, he changed all the economic numbers in Argentina. So what he's doing in Argentina is an example for the rest of the continent. A continent that has poor people, not because it has to be that way, but because of socialist wrong economic measures or politics. It's showing a way out of poverty for all Latin America. We shouldn't have one poor with all the resources we have. That can be exported. But also he's exporting a second revolution, that he's given arguments against wokeism. And these arguments are being listened all over the world. I mean, he was brave enough to go to the World Economic Forum and debate on the wrong side of wokeism in front of all of those people with good arguments. He's educating people. He's an educator. He's a professor. So, Mrs. Ambassador, I am saying today, and I've been saying it publicly, there is an international effort of the left to bring down Milei. Why? It's necessary for them that his revolution is not exported. So they want to impeach them, they want to put them traps, they're organizing an international effort against him. What I propose in an article that I wrote last week is that we do the opposite, centering in Venezuela. Centering in Venezuela. We must organize the fall of the Venezuelan dictator. It's very easy. I will tell you in a few minutes why, when I speak about the criminality. But if the dictatorship of Venezuela falls, the Maria Corina Machado Venezuelan country with Javier Milei Argentinian country, that combination, it'll change the whole situation in the continent. Because we're talking about two strong leaders that are very clear and one has to do, and that they're friends and they can work together as we did 200 years ago. 200 years ago, Argentina and Venezuela took the leadership of the changes, political changes in our countries. They can do that again. So we must concentrate on that situation in Venezuela. Automatically, if Venezuela falls, Nicaragua and Cuba will fall. Lula will lose next elections as Boric, and Petro, I don't know if he'll stand until the end of his government next year. But if he does, he will lose elections as well. We will have a blue continent. But we must make sure that Javier Milei stays in power and Nicolás Maduro goes out. All right? How to do this? And what's the presence of Donald Trump do for this? And what are our proposals for the world in this case? Where is my magic machine? Here it is. I say that the São Paulo Forum became a criminal organization. They were criminals 30 years ago too. but because there were violent people using weapons with guerrillas to obtain power illegally. Yes. But now they have become drug lords. This is an active reward from the Justice Department of the United States, active today for $25 million for the capture of the dictator of Venezuela. Also, his second in command, Diosdado Cabello, $25 million. Also, the Minister of Defense, Padrino Lopez, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, $15 million. $65 million altogether, three people. Why? Narco-terrorism, conspiracy, cocaine importation. He's the head of the cartel of the Suns. What does the cartel of the Suns do? This is taken from the Inside Crime org. Nicolás Maduro is responsible for pushing between 20 and 25% of the Western Hemisphere cocaine. From 20 to 25% of the Western Hemisphere cocaine consumes in the streets, even here in Hungary. And it goes from Colombia to Central America to the United States, or to Europe, to Africa, or to the Caribbean, or from there. This is what has been investigated. He's a drug lord. Let's talk about the rest of the people in the São Paulo Forum. This is the son of President Gustavo Petro, arrested on money laundering charges. What did he say? The money was not for me. It was for my father's campaign. And who gave you the money? The drug cartels. So he received money. It's not the enemies of Gustavo Petro who said that. His son, Nicolás. Peru's ex-former president, where he is, he's in jail. Why? Because he perpetrated a coup d'etat in Peru. He tried to dissolve the Congress, so they caught him. He's in jail now. Another member of the São Paulo Forum. Rafael Correa, sentenced to 8 years for corruption. Talking about Argentina, Cristina Kirchner, 6 years for fraud case, $1 billion. Another criminal. All members of the São Paulo Forum. Evo Morales, this guy is a triple criminal. He perpetrated a coup d'etat in a fraud, an electoral fraud in 2019. He is the head of the drug cartel of Cochabamba, El Chapare. And he has, it's very hard to say this because he's a former Latin American president, but he violated several girls. I mean, 12-year, 13-year, 14-year girls. So he's a serial violator. This is an investigation of AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, Mexico. You were mentioning Mexico. He received money from the drug cartels. This is also from Inside Crime. Xiomara Castro, who is the president of Honduras, her brother-in-law received money. It's recorded in video, receiving money from drug cartels. So these are the guys of the São Paulo Forum. Lula, he was sentenced for 9.5 years in jail. Why is he free? And why is he in the presidency again? Because his friend, Judge Alexandre de Moraes, discovered, quote unquote, that some errors, some procedure errors were committed in his trial. So it's not that he's innocent, it's that he was let free because of certain maneuvers, all right? This is the first book I wrote on the São Paulo Forum. I know I'm taking long, but let me dedicate do I need to talk in the microphone?
Yes. Yes.
For the video, okay. This is the first book I wrote on the São Paulo Forum. Hmm? FARC. Why I wrote this book? Because in that year, there was an operation, military operation of the government of Colombia, headed by President Álvaro Uribe Vélez, who I know personally and who I admire, Álvaro Uribe Vélez. He decided to go into the Ecuadorian territory, just a few miles, to capture the head of the FARC Revolutionary Army of Colombia, Raúl Reyes. Why did he go into the Ecuadorian territory? Because every time that he asked Rafael Correa, who was, as I said, sentenced for corruption, he said, listen, Correa, Raúl Reyes is over here. Here are the coordinates. Then the camp would move. He was working with the FARC. So after the third time, Álvaro Uribe decided to go into Ecuador, and he killed, well, not him, the military and the operation. They killed Raúl Reyes. They captured his computer, and who were there in the computer mentioned? All of the guys of the São Paulo Forum were friends of Raúl Reyes. Néstor Kirchner from Argentina, Rafael Correa, Hugo Chavez. The computer had the information on how they worked together. So, and who was the FARC in that moment? The most important cocaine cartel of the Western Hemisphere, until the cartel of the Suns took over. So they were working with the drugs, all of them, on the São Paulo Forum. And this is how we must see this fight. It's not left against right, although it is also like that. It is conservative, democratic sector against organized crime. So what do we Latin Americans need from Donald Trump? We need this. This is all we need. We don't need an invasion. We don't need the Marines in our country. No. This action, the few executed, what date? The same date that Donald Trump took over, took his White House, January the 20th. Designate the cartels and other foreign terrorist organizations as global terrorists. This is all we need, because then we don't think of Nicolás Maduro or Evo Morales or Gustavo Petro as politicians who are crooked and they're leftists and they're wrong. No, they're terrorists working with drugs. There must be a police operation, not political or military, police operation against this criminal. So this is what must be used in Venezuela. And if we turn Venezuela blue, then Argentina and Venezuela together will change the whole continent in blue. And then we will have, as here, European, the opportunity of developing that beautiful continent full of resources into a place where we can do business together for the benefit of both continents. So this is what must be done. Yeah, that's it.
The obvious follow-up, Zsolt, is to ask you what you have to say as a member of European, of the Hungarian Parliament, but secondly, as the president, rather, of the political committee of the Council of Europe, in relation to this kind of activity and this kind of response, because, I mean, that really was an answer to my question, and a very big answer, too, and a different answer to I've heard anyone else give.
Thank you very much. And I hope we will be able to get these slides from the Danube Institute and to make these informations in such an organized way available to everybody. today I'm not anymore the president of the Political Affairs Committee, but I have been elected to be the president of the Conservatives and the Patriots in the Council of Europe, which is now, as you know, an international organization where the Patriots and the Conservatives are united. And I think that is a very important signal inside the Council of Europe that this is the way forward for European organization. And we have discussed the importance of the creation of the Patriots. I think that was the most important European development last year, that the Patriots have been created. And now we are encouraged to see how it develops. We can see the weaknesses as well. So I was not too happy to see a few statements by Madame Le Pen concerning Donald Trump. I think we need to unite on these key questions of peace and the Ukrainian-Russian war. And now the Patriots should not remain divided on this subject. We need to bridge over these kind of differences. But not just inside the Patriots, but I think the Patriots and the Conservatives need to come closer. And I don't want to go now into the details of the Ukrainian-Russian war because let the European Council solve that problem. Today, it's now in these minutes happening, and hopefully they will bring some good news to us. I'm convinced that there will be a positive outcome of this because the commitment of the United States is strong. And the signals have been strong as well on behalf of the Ukrainian president yesterday. And hopefully we will be beyond this. And as soon as the war question is settled, which will be settled, I'm convinced, there will be a new political situation for creating this kind of broader conservative, national conservative, patriotic unity inside Europe. We need to sort it out. And we are committed to do that. And I think Hungary has been very important in the creation of the patriots. But what you have raised, I do agree with you that we need to go beyond. And I think those positive tendencies, what we can experience now in the US, in Latin America, hopefully in Canada. So in a broader circle, we need to internationalize. We need a patriotic international. Because, as you said, in the international organizations, we are not having our voice heard. Neither in the UN, but not even in the International Democratic Union, the IDU, or in NATO circles, NATO Parliamentary Assembly. So I think these are important fora, and we need to move beyond Europe. But now the first task is in front of us, is the creation of a stronger conservative national unity inside Europe. I 100% agree with you. In America, I think this kind of executive order plus those personal decisions what have been decided, we shouldn't neglect how important players are now nominated by Donald Trump. And I think Marco Rubio's commitment towards this project, what was outlined by Alejandro, I think we should send him the slides. So Marco Rubio, the foreign secretary. Then the security advisor, Waltz, commitment is very strong. Now we have got the deputy foreign minister who is decided. Tell me the name of the new American deputy foreign minister. He has been approved yesterday. Christopher Landau grew up in Venezuela, has got a very direct experience on Latin America because he's the son of the former U.S. ambassador to Venezuela. He will be the deputy foreign minister. So I think the attention of the administration towards Latin America will be there. And if we have this commitment, plus we have the personal background, and hopefully there will be some important European developments in the coming years which may tap into this effort, this plan might be realized. But I'm very glad that you have outlined the task. Thank you very much, Alejandro.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. On a very narrow point, Zsolt, there are actually European bodies which look into the conduct of elections. My impression is that, unlike some other bodies, these are reasonably fair-minded. Is that? Would you say that? Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think we can move into that direction. Election observation. Actually, in CDI, in the Christian Democratic International, we are now considering for quite a long time the creation of an election observatory. I think this is one of the key. This is the second book of Alejandro Peña, written about the electoral frauds in Latin America and globally. It relates to Africa also, and we should, I think, pay attention to Africa as well in our analysis, which is a bit more complicated than Latin America.
Yes. Now let me ask: can we take some questions from the floor? Yeah. Would anyone like to ask a question? Ah, yes, the lady. Yeah. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Monica Gyuri. I'm a member of the European Parliament recently, and I've been in charge of dealing with Latin America from our party. And I had the honor to participate in 3 electoral missions in 3 Latin American countries, Colombia, Guatemala, and Ecuador, very recently in Ecuador. But the first thing we all have to know that when you start dealing with Latin America, you have to abandon European mindset. You will not be able to understand Latin American politics with the European mindset. I would agree with most of the things which have been said here, and just quick reactions to certain issues. First, I think both the US and the EU abandoned Latin America in the last decades. That's how and why São Paulo Forum, for example, could take over. And if you don't take over politically or economically, or you're not there, someone else will take it. Who took it over in economic terms? China. It's crystal clear. They have a very strong presence, and it's partially our fault. So I think it's a very important matter of fact we have to bear in mind. My second observation is on this terrorist financing and the involvement of the narco in politics. It's very much true, everything you have said. Even they are financing political parties, political players, because over there, political players are not necessarily having political parties. Sometimes you have players, and later on they have parties, or you have parties who are maybe not very much associated with their own leaders. So you have all these kind of things. What I think the US politics now is very crystal clear towards the region. Unless you behave as I want you to behave, I stop doing business with you, just like what they did with Colombia. Started to talk about tariffs the day after everything was arranged. With Mexico, they were saying that for 1 month they will not introduce tariffs, and yesterday they did. And then 3 automotive companies went to see Trump. So now the automotive sector is exempted from the tariffs. So it's a bit, how should I say, intuitive how we are dealing with, how the US is dealing with the region, but the threat is clear. And as I see, everyone wants to behave. Europe too, no doubt about it. What is missing, and how you can really fight the narco, is only if you have something, a kind of shield, also on behalf of the consumers. In the sense, unless you stop consuming it, there will be always production and trade. So actually I hate when Petro says, and he does say it, when someone blames him for what is happening in Colombia on the production side. If you didn't eat it, if you didn't consume it, we would not produce it, because it's a trade issue. I hate when he says that, but some truth is there in these sentences. So what we should do is to block our ports that the boats cannot enter, and we are not doing it. Our ports are terrible, and I know it from colleagues. When you have the shooting in Brussels, when you have the shooting in some Nordic ports, and now more and more is now orienting towards Andalusia, to Spain, and not just the Galician part. We have heavy corruption issues all over our shores. So we should stop it over there, because then maybe 20-25% is distributed in Venezuela, but in Ecuador, the remaining 70% is distributed over there. So unless we do that, it will never work. And we cannot help those leaders in South America which take this fight seriously. There will be no success at all. And the final word, and sorry if I'm a bit long, is the trade part. Now we have the Mercosur agreement. We have huge difficulties in Europe with that. We don't need enemies because we are there. I mean, I'm not talking about as Hungarian, but as European Union. I am 100% sure that the Mercosur agreement has much more advantages for Europe than disadvantages. I think it's a good deal. It was a good deal 5 years ago. It's a good deal now. It's good for Hungary, for our industry. But the political climate is terrible now. But these fears are based on perceptions and not on figures, facts and figures. Because just as you were mentioning beef, you know how much extra beef arrived to Europe with preferential quota or no quota. 1 hamburger per European. So this is the quantity we are so much afraid of. It has become a national issue in France, from the communists to Le Pen, to be against the Mercosur agreement. But it has nothing to do with reality. And we have to do it, and we have to be there, because if we don't do it, that we will not be able to create business opportunities for us and for them. And the Chinese are very welcome. And the Chinese are always much more pleasant and much easier trade partners and business partners than we are. And Europe should bear that in mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, would either of you like to respond to what the ambassador said?
Probably one more element which we would have to follow closely is the decision to withdraw the preferential treatment of Venezuela by the United States. This is also a recent decision. And against the fact that very strong American interests, the Chevron interests, were behind. Chevron was disregarded by the Trump administration, and they have suspended the export rights of Venezuela. And I think it is also a very good news, and proves that there is a very proactive attitude of Trump, and Venezuela is in the forefront of the attention of the new administration. I just wanted to add this to the list what you have mentioned, Anneke, and I do agree with you that the main problem is that this negligence towards the region by America, and probably it would be very useful to have a closer consultation between Europe and the US on the whole region, and probably it will not be Spain who will be a partner in that. But if we look a bit beyond, and if we have this kind of transatlantic dialogue, more intensive, more concrete, more focused, then Latin America could be on the agenda and could benefit from it. Thank you.
Alejandro, would you like to come in? No? No. Okay. Okay. Well, let me ask for, thank you. Let me ask for another question. So on. Yes, Ambassador.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I am the ambassador of Argentina. I don't want to make a specific question, but just as a way of thinking, it's important to see that Latin America and Argentina is now a topic, an issue. I believe that you are reflecting about the bilateral relation with this amazing continent. And I believe we had a talk some months ago with Enrico that we are under appreciating the region. So, and on the other side, the problems that we see, I believe that the response is a global response. So what we are seeing that organized crime, drug, leadership, all find peace, all need a global response. And I think, being an ambassador of Argentina, that you take the time to analyze, reflect, and obviously work together to find a better relationship, to find good networks, opportunities for our trade companies and people. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. No, are there any other another question? I have a question, actually, which is, we used to think of Latin America as being a Catholic region. About 25, 30 years ago, we saw the rise of evangelical Protestantism, not evenly, but in some countries more than others. And that seemed to have some political impacts. There seems at the moment, I think, in the world to be something, in this continent and in the United States, a revival of Christianity again. There's much greater interest in Christianity. There are people who are thinking of becoming Christians and indeed agonizing in public about whether they should or not. Does religion have any impact on the things that you were discussing? Because once it would have been seen that the Catholic Church would have been an obstacle to the São Paulo Forum, but I wonder whether or not who plays that role today, if anyone?
And another question is the book, third book, Alejandro, because now you are at the book show, and classical culture taps into this question, and I would be grateful if you reflected on your third book. Why did you write a book about the role of classical culture against drug cartels and terrorists and these kind of dangers? How does it relate to each other?
Well, actually, both questions are related because although we can fight using politics and using armed forces and police forces against the evil, the real way to fight it is through culture, through the identity of the population. So in the same time that I wrote the book on the São Paulo Forum, parallel to that, I wrote, this is the last book, which is in the back for those who want it. But this is a new edition of this book. This book was written in 2008. Why did I write this book? I wrote it because I was traveling all over Latin America. I visited every country in Latin America. denouncing the São Paulo Forum and telling people, don't vote for them. I went to every country in election time. Don't vote for these guys because they're going to destroy your country. And still people would vote for them. And I said, what's going on here? Why people want to commit collective suicide? Some telephone is sounding over there. They're a little bit terrific. In any case, I said, why? Why this is happening? So I started to investigate this matter and say, well, there is a change in culture. So I wrote this book to promote the idea that we have to wage a cultural warfare against our Marxist adversary. Because using the ideas of Gramsci, they're promoting three, let me say it this way. If you would want to say in very few words what is Christian culture, let's put it in few sentences, you would say three things. First, God exists, and he's not only God, he's a loving Father who loves each of us. Second aspect of Christian civilization, man is made in his image and likeness. So we have a divine spark. And third, there are universal truths that are valid always, no matter where, no matter what society, no matter what part of the world. If you would resume in 3 sentences what is Christian Western civilization, you could say those 3 points. So Gramsci and cultural Marxism attacked exactly that. God does not exist, man is intelligent, but just an animal, and there are no truths. Everything depends on opinion. This is why late Pope Benedict XVI said that the most important problem of humanity was relativism. He wrote it. When I read that, I said, well, he didn't say wars. He didn't say the most important problem is criminality, drugs, pandemics. No, relativism. Because if you don't know how to distinguish between right and wrong, then you're lost. Let me say it this way, to use wokist words. If you can convince any person that a man is a woman, or that a woman is a man, if you can convince him of that, then you can convince him of anything, or even to vote for Hugo Chavez. So those 3 points about God, human beings, and truth are exposed, are presented, are embedded always in classical art. In classical art, be it music, Handel, Bach, Beethoven, be it in architecture, Brunelleschi, be it in Shakespeare literature, always God exists, and he's a loving Father. Man is made in his image, and truth is eternal. Well, certain truths are eternal and always valid. So I wrote this book, and then in the next edition, which you have down there in Hungarian, the way I try to explain what I was thinking was through comparisons, through contrapositions, and to put in, on the one hand, classical art, on the other hand, postmodern art. So I brought you some examples. Let me speak about this. This is the credo of Vivaldi, and this part is the credo which you pray when you go to Mass. And this is the part when Christ is resurrected. That's why the music of this credo is resurrected, and at the end it says, judicare, judicare, to judge living and dead. This is the part of Vivaldi's Credo, and this was played in the Cappella dei Mercanti, the chapel of the merchants in Torino, Italy, where I live. So in my book, I want to compare that with postmodernism. This is John Cage composing music for Marcel Duchamp. This is a concert. This is a concert. There's people there who paid an extra to go there. So John Cage composes music, I think I'm going to interrupt, for Marcel Duchamp. Who is him? He's the author of this supposedly beautiful artwork. This is in Hungarian. Supposedly, 500 artists voted saying that this was the most influential artwork of the century, made by Duchamp. So I want, with my book and with my conferences that I give all over to young people, I want them to compare what is classical art with this postmodern existentialist art. Let's put some more examples. This is, of course, some of you know this in the Vatican Museum, La Accademia di Atenas, the Academy of Athens, which is very beautiful, very colorful. This is Da Vinci, the face of Da Vinci, but it's representing Plato, and this is representing Aristotle. This guy here is Michelangelo. This guy here is Raffaello, the guy who painted it. This is Bramante, the face of Bramante is the architect of the St. Peter's Cathedral, etc., etc. This is a beautiful work of art. Colors, harmony, etc. This is a fresco. This is painted in a wall. And let's compare with postmodern art. This is Rothko, Marco Rothko. Well, he can paint this if he wants, no problem. I'm not saying I like it or I don't like it. Supposedly this is a work of art. But what impresses me is the price that it was sold. It was sold for $375 million, this painting. So I want young people to compare. So let's compare, for example, this beautiful sculpture that many people don't know. This sculpture is a Pietà, but not the Pietà in the Vatican, no. This is the Museo della Opera in Florence. And this is sculptured by the same guy, Michelangelo. And the difference is that Nicodemo is taking Jesus from the cross and giving it to his mother. But whose face is the face of Nicodemo? That's the face of Michelangelo. It's a self-portrait when he was 80 years old. That's why I like this so much. This picture I took myself. And I compare it with Giacometti's sculpture. Compare them. And it was sold in $104.3 million. It's important for young people to compare and see what's art and what's not, and what are the values that are in one or in another one. Then, you are. Good, good, I like that. Well, what I say about postmodern art is not that it's beautiful or not beautiful, is that you have to interpret what you think it says. But not here. You don't have to interpret anything here. This is God. This is a sculpture made at the same time that America was being discovered, and it's still today the biggest brick dome construction in the world today, by Brunelleschi. Then I will compare this with another form of architecture, but first, I will put you this. And you say, well, this is not architecture. Why are you putting the Brunelleschi dome of the Santa Maria del Fiore Cathedral with this? Well, this is a musician and an architect. He's Greek, Yannis Xenakis. And this is music that he wrote. So he decided that he would build a structure based on his same music scores. And this is it. The Philips Pavilion in Brussels, 1956. Again, it's arbitrary. I'm not saying it's beautiful, not beautiful, I like it. I'm not going into that discussion. I'm saying that classical art has God made in his image and truth. And postmodern or existentialist art is God is not there, truth is not there, and man as a divine spark is not there. I'm not saying I don't like it or I like it, all right? So my book is to promote the ideas, the culture, the beauty, the love for God, the love for family, the love for country that would help us fight against cultural Marxism that is São Paulo Forum and defeat it. Because it's more a cultural war than a political war.
I don't think we can continue for much longer. I'm happy to be contradicted by, no, okay. In that case, I'm going to ask one final question, which really picks up your last few remarks. The Latin American novelists who've really influenced Europe in the last, 2 or 3, 40 or 50 years. I think from the left, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and from the right, Mario Vargas Llosa. Yeah. Who, first, please, as the examination papers say, compare and contrast. And secondly, who is the Latin American writer that we benighted Europeans should be looking to today in order to understand the recent continent?
Well, you'd say, well, this guy knows a lot about art, Alejandro Peña. I don't. No. I'm a person who is fighting against an enemy, and when I fight this enemy, I understand things, and then I write about it. It's all testimony, personal experience. I'm an engineer. I'm not a musician. I'm not an artist. I'm not a humanist. I'm not a philosopher. I write those 2 books, but I'm not an expert. But I can say this. The writers from 200 years ago who were more influenced by classical art, for example, the Venezuelan musician Felipe Larrazábal, who nobody knows, I believe that they presented these 3 concepts that I said before on classical art. And now, from, let's say, 60, 70 years ago, they do not anymore do that. And this happens not only in Latin America, but in Europe and the United States, because it's a wave that has gone against me say it this way to finish. The left, when it was defeated politically, decided to give the battle using the ideas of Antonio Gramsci, that is the cultural battle. While the right, when it wins politically, says, well, now that we have the power, we have to develop enterprises, to create jobs, to build houses, to build infrastructure. And the culture, no, we get the culture to the left. So right-wing governments would have left-wing thinkers taking charge of culture. And in my opinion, that's very wrong. I'm not saying let's go back to the past, to classical art. What I'm saying is let's inspire ourselves in classical art to create new generation of writers, of sculptors, of painters, of poets, that will transmit the beauty of our Western civilization. And I think that can be done. I think governments must be involved on that. Besides that, thank you very much for your kind attention and for having come here.
Well, thank you very much. Unless, would you like a final word, Zsolt?
Yeah, I would like to say that we have heard Alejandro Peña, and you should listen to him also in the future. One thing probably needs to be said, that now he is ours. He is a Hungarian. You should know that he is a Hungarian citizen because he had to flee from Chavez, because he was running against Chavez as a presidential candidate in Venezuela. And then he was imprisoned because of his strong political commitment. So he is a fighter. You could hear him. He's a political fighter. But he's also an intellect with this kind of deep rootedness into our civilization. And he's also a deep Christian. And you can hear when he speaks, his faith is reflected in his words. But as a Hungarian, now we are very glad that he was able. First he had to flee to Colombia, but then he had to flee Colombia, then he went to Italy. But last year, for example, in Italy, he could not travel because he doesn't have a citizenship, and that's why the political refugee there, it was not possible for him to come to us or travel. And now he got the Hungarian citizenship, and now he's ours. And I hope that he will build this bridge in all three fields between us and Latin America, in the political, in the intellectual, and in the spiritual domain as well. And thank you very much for publishing, for writing, for publishing these books. And I would like to reiterate that as a leading expert of us, of the Christian Democratic Institute, he will be with us. Please follow us and let us collaborate in the future. Thank you for coming. And I'm sure that Alejandro is ready hogy dedikálja a könyvet to everybody, to dedicate, I don't know if it is said in English, his book to all of you who intend to have it. Thank you very much for coming.